Okay, so hopefully that giant one didn't just show up on the screen, but let's take a look at today's lessons. I'm gonna move this up here, and I'm gonna have this down here. So when we're looking at the time period of Reconstruction, we already went over some of the basics in the review that we did in the last lesson. If you need to, go back and look at the last Lessoncast. But Reconstruction is an era of nearly a decade of total control of the government by the legislative branch. Congress dominates the government. And that's largely due to the fact that there were two exceptionally weak presidents during the time period. Andrew Johnson, who after his impeachment was really could do absolutely nothing. In fact, Johnson spent the last year plus of his presidency at home in Tennessee, never set foot in Washington. Now, somehow the country still ran without having an active president, really, which is, I don't know if it's a good thing or not. And there's also kind of speaks volumes about like the role of the president, maybe. I'm not really quite sure how to interpret that, but yeah, it got along without him, okay. Then there's Ulysses S. Grant, or as he earned a new nickname during his time, Useless S. Grant. Grant doesn't have a problem because Congress basically, removes him from having any power like Johnson. Grant has no power because Grant doesn't think he does. Grant's interpretation of the Constitution is that the president, really can't do much of anything. He can sign bills, he can, negotiate treaties, he can veto stuff, and he's the commander in chief of the military, but really there's not much else going on. And that's the way that Grant approached his government. Now, to give Grant props on one thing, the problems of the Ku Klux Klan were really a military issue in Grant's mind, and he was determined to wipe them out and did a pretty good job. He got them really sort of removed from mainstream society for a time. They come back bigger and weirder than ever. But other than that, he doesn't do a whole heck of a lot. When he did stuff, he made really poor choices. So here's the thing about Grant. Ulysses S. Grant is one of the most honest, solid, upstanding men you could ever meet. His reputation was impeccable. His character was unquestionable. His judgment and his faith in people, exceptionally questionable. Grant's advisors were horribly corrupt. His administration was riddled with corruption. Grant himself, not at all corrupt. The problem is that even when it was shown to him, like demonstrably shown to him, that members of his cabinet or people in his government were corrupt, he had a really hard time believing it. He really trusted his friends. It also didn't help matters that because Grant himself was such a personal failure when it came to issues of money management and running businesses, that he became convinced that anybody who had money or successfully ran a business was smarter than him and needed to be listened to. This is not a good combination to be president. At the end of his first term, he had caused an economic depression. He got reelected because people loved him. The country was in bad shape and it kept getting worse, but nobody blamed Grant. Now, this is a really departure for us, given the environment that we live in where everything is the president's fault. Instead, people blamed the Republican Party. Now, to be fair about this, the Republicans controlled Congress, so yeah, it was kind of their fault. Um, but what ended up happening was that the Republican Party began losing elections, even though Grant won. And by the middle of 1874, 75, the Republicans were really beginning to question the wisdom of Grant continuing in his role as president and foreseeing a position where Grant could actually destroy the Republican Party. All of this tied into the fact that Reconstruction just had to end. It was no longer doing what it was supposed to. The country was stagnating. We weren't moving at all, not economically, not socially, not culturally. There was nothing there that was advancing America and making us a better place. But how do you move on? How do you put America, how do you put this behind us and open up a new chapter? It's not like you can just wake up one day and sort of say, well, that didn't work, so we're going to forget about it and move on. It's not that easy. And it's also not going to be easy sort of like getting people on board when there's so much tied into this. There's a genuine question for how Reconstruction's end will affect the Republican Party. Remember, the Republicans were created for one reason, that was to oppose slavery. Slavery no longer exists. Well, what happens now? Do the Republicans grow past the slavery issue and, find other things to do? Or do they end up the way of, the Federalists, the Whigs, the know-nothings, and just kind of disappear? Nobody really knew. And to give credit to many Republicans, there is a genuine concern of how it's going to affect Black America. In the minds of many, many Republicans, the only thing keeping Black Americans safe and giving them an opportunity in the world was the government, and specifically the way that the Republican Party was in charge of the government and Reconstruction. And if you end Reconstruction, what's going to happen to them? Nobody's quite sure. But what helped provide a convenient opportunity to move on past the problems of Reconstruction, past the problems of Grant's administration, past the economic problems that America is going through, is an event. That event is 1876. Now, you're like, that's a year, it's not an event. You're correct, it's a year. But that year, America turns 100. It is our 100th birthday. The technical term for this, by the way, is a centennial. It is the 100th anniversary of something. And the United States has changed a lot in 100 years. I mean, this was America in 1776. This little strip of red, and all the rest of this stuff was Britain, Spain, more or less unclaimed and unsettled, but a lot of Russia. Now, this giant sprawling mass is America. we had achieved manifest destiny. We went sea to sea. These weird mustardy colored things are territories. They're not states, but they are part of America. We even had Alaska. We exceed our manifest destiny. Hawaii, by the way, its own independent kingdom at this time. So America was gigantic, and we had really grown in 100 years. And there was this desire to show that off. But how to do so? Well, that's part of where this little special year comes in. Right at the end of the Civil War in 1866, a professor from the University of Pennsylvania wrote a letter to Pennsylvania's congressional delegation reminding them that in 10 short years in 1876, America would celebrate its centennial. And he proposed that America should host a massive birthday celebration in the form of an international exposition, a World's Fair. Now, the World's Fair is like State Fair on steroids. They were held every 3 to 5 years. The very first one was in England in 1851. It was called the Great Exposition. It was organized by Queen Victoria and her husband, Prince Albert. And its purpose was to basically show off how awesome the British Empire was and get people to just go, darn, why can't I be British? And it worked out amazingly well. England built this gigantic glass building in the middle of Hyde Park, London, called the Crystal Palace. And inside of it, they had products and inventions and people from all over the British Empire. And they invited other countries to come and check it out. And they also invited other countries for a small fee to set up their own displays around Hyde Park and show off what they had to offer. And this worked out smashingly well for everybody. Everybody walked away with this, oh my gosh, Britain is so amazing. I wish we were British. And the expo made a ton of money for the British. Now, not to be outdone, a few years later, the French, oui, monsieur, hosted their own expo in Paris to show off how great it was to be French. A few years later, it's back in London because ain't no Frenchie going to show up, no British guy. No frog is going to show up the lobsters. Well, not to be outdone, a few years later, the French came back again to show how awesome they were. Then, the Austrians decided to host one in Vienna. This became such a big thing every few years that an actual international committee was set up to oversee these expos. And so in 1866, the United States officially put in an application to host an expo in Philadelphia, which makes a lot of sense if you think about this. Philadelphia is where the Declaration and the Constitution were both written and signed. It's also America's first capital during the Revolution, and our second capital as a country. So, with all this having been said, Congress is like, yes, we want to do this. They get the permission to go ahead and get it done. Congress is like, yes, let's do this. Let's show off how great America is, but we're not going to pay for any of it. So instead, the entire event is going to be paid for through private donation and groups of people who are willing to pony up the over $1 million of back then money that it's going to cost to set this up. Its cost in modern money would probably be, buying power wise, about $100 million. There are going to be 3 official themes for the 1876 Philadelphia World Expo, which will run for 6 months. So imagine State Fair running for 6 months from May the 10th to November the 10th of 1876. Its official name is the International Exhibition of Arts, Manufacturers, and Products of the Soil and Mine. Its three themes will be: number one, American industry and technology, the cool inventions and stuff that America has to offer and to showcase to people. Secondly, America and its land. We are an enormous country. I mean, I don't think we often appreciate this, but I think that we are the third or fourth geographically large country in the world. We're huge. America has lots of stuff that we grow, lots of foods that we make and produce, a lot of weird rocks we pull out of the ground. Let's show them all off. And finally, the centennial itself, our 100th birthday, and how we've grown and changed over 100 years. So this is where we're going to pick this up tomorrow and talk more about what's going on. Alrighty, that's it. Peace and love. Peace and love.